I am Jamie, and welcome back to your favorite hit show on Evolution 1079 called Ranked, where I take a look at content from anything and everything and put it into a ranking of my very own choosing because this is my show and I want to. In this edition of Ranked, in honor of the NFL regular season coming to an end, I want to take a look at the 5 most disappointing teams from this year's NFL regular season. And I will tell you one thing, this list was easy to make. Lots of disappointment around the NFL this season, and there's lots to get to, so let's get started with our number 5 entry. Coming in at number 5 is the Miami Dolphins, and Miami was this close to not making the list this year, especially after their 2021 season came to an end. There was some serious talk about this team, especially defensively, being a dark horse in the NFL coming into 2021, and it all started with Brian Flores as head coach. He instilled a brand new culture on this team, and he turned role players into genuine leaders inside the locker room. Then he brought in guys like Jerome Baker and Byron Jones, and their last 2 draft classes were stellar, and Jalen Phillips coming in the first round, Javon Holland in the second, Raekwon Davis last year, Christian Wilkins the year before. They did everything right to set themselves up for success. They ended the 2020 season winning 9 of their last 12 games, and they looked to carry that momentum into the start of this year, and then everything fell apart. They barely, and I mean barely, beat the Patriots week 1 this year, and then somehow found a way to lose their next 7 straight games, and the dark horse defense was a shell of its former self. Miami somehow found a way to marginally save their season, winning their next 7 games, even giving them playoff hopes with 2 games still left in the season. They became the first team to ever lose 7 straight and win 7 straight games in the same year, but then they lost their last 2 games, and the worst part of all, Brian Flores lost his job. And it was a power issue, not even a performance issue. It was Brian Flores wanting more control over general manager Chris Grier, so Grier fired him, and honestly, it's just sad. I don't know where you're going to find an upgrade at head coach over Brian Flores. Speaking of teams that need an upgrade at head coach, this brings me to the number 4 team on this list, and it's the Seattle Seahawks. Only one time in the last 10 years have the Seahawks had a losing record, and they did it this year. And it wasn't even Russell Wilson's fault. I'm honestly not here to take a dump on Russ, but I am here to take a dump on everybody else in this organization, and that includes Pete Carroll. Yes, it does. The only thing Russell Wilson really did wrong this year was come back from injury a little too quickly, and I mean, you can't really blame the guy for trying to be a warrior. But maybe in the offseason, when Russ says, "Hey guys, can you get me some help?" you listen to him. Because bringing in Gabe Jackson and Gerald Everett is just not going to cut it. There's no protection for Wilson out there when he is playing, and he's constantly running around, making it near impossible for him to get to the ball to the 2 receivers that you actually do have. There's absolutely no run game at all. Don't let Rashard Penny's 3 good games of football fool you. And Chris Carson is made of glass. He's missed 21 games in his career. That's 30% of the games. How this team managed to crawl to a 7-10 finish is beyond me, and they won't even get a good draft pick out of it because they traded away the farm to get Jamal Adams, who has miraculously underperformed in his own right. Now, I'm going to be nice about this because I like the guy, but it's time to fire Pete Carroll. Okay, maybe not fire him, but strongly suggest that he retires, and I mean strongly. I mean, the guy is 70, and it's time for a change. The Seahawks don't really owe him anything either. I mean, it was Russ that saved the franchise, not Pete Carroll. Pete Carroll is 15 games below 500 without Russell Wilson. It's time to make a change. It's not great. Speaking of another team it's time to make a change for, brings me to the number 3 team on this list. A team that I know all too well. Yes, unfortunately, the 3rd team on my list is in fact the Denver Broncos, and I could probably talk about how disappointing my Broncos are for an entire video in its own right, but in doing so, I'd probably give myself a stroke. So let's speed this one up. It's been a long, rough stretch of years for Broncos country, and there are 3 obvious reasons why, and it's really frustrating because it's been about the same for 6 years now. The first issue is the most obvious issue. There's no quarterback. Well, let me rephrase. There's too many quarterbacks because we've started 11 of them since Peyton Manning retired. No one has run away with the job. It's just that simple. But the management hasn't exactly provided the best candidates for the job either. I mean, Trevor Siemian, Paxton Lynch, Case Keenum, Joe Flacco, Drew Lock, Teddy Bridgewater. And that's only half of them. If we find some consistency at quarterback with the weapons that we actually have on our roster, we could probably find a way to win a lot of games. The second issue is the coaching staff. The management has provided nowhere near the best options at quarterback for our coaches, but the coaches have done piss all with the ones that they've been given. There's been no offensive identity on this team in years, even though it's right in front of us. Our offensive line is good enough to run the football behind. Check. And we've had at least 2 capable running backs on our roster for 3 straight seasons now. Melvin Gordon, Phillip Lindsay, now Javonte Williams, even Royce Freeman when he was here. They've all proved their worth, and instead, we have decided to trust the quarterback that we simply don't have. Good job, guys. The third reason is the special teams. The amount of times that I have watched a team return a punt or a kick, or blocked a punt or a kick, makes me want to run my head into the corner of my couch. Thankfully, Denver has already fired Tom McMahon and Vic Fangio, and Pat Shurmur, for that matter, so I won't need to do that. All that's left now is to find the quarterback, and we could maybe, potentially, have some hope in Denver. This brings me to the number 2 team on my list, and it is the Chicago Bears. Here's a fun fact that might surprise you. Last year, the Chicago Bears were in the playoffs. They didn't win, but they were there. And they got there with a combination of Mitch Trubisky and Nick Foles at quarterback. How, you might ask? Well, I have no bloody idea, but they did it. So, okay, how do we build on that and actually win a playoff game? Well, they already have a solid defense. That's good. Allen Robinson is a really good receiver. That's also good. Drafting Justin Fields. That's also really, really good. What's next? Signing Andy Dalton in free agency and declaring him the starter over Justin Fields. Okay, we got to stop there because that's a really bad idea. But no, they went ahead and did it anyhow. And how'd it turn out? Well, not one quarterback on their roster threw for more than 2,000 yards. They didn't have a 1,000-yard running back. And only one receiver recorded more than 615 yards, and it wasn't Allen Robinson. They ranked dead last in total offense and missed the playoffs. There's a lot to unpack there, so let's start with Matt Nagy because you have to. Bears fans have been calling for his job for about 3 years now, and for some reason, management has just stuck with him. Personally, I think he should have been gone last year, but then they went ahead and grabbed Justin Fields in the draft, and everybody thought he was going to be the savior to Matt Nagy and his offense and save his job. But no, instead, Nagy decides not to start him, to start Andy Dalton instead. We're not going to utilize Justin Fields and his skill set, and when he does play, we're not going to call plays that help Justin Fields be successful on the field. Thankfully, as of this past Monday, Nagy is out in Chicago, as is general manager Ryan Pace, so the Bears can hopefully finally rebuild this coaching staff and put this roster to good use. I mean, all they got to do is get the coach right now, right? I hear they're looking into Doug Peterson. That could be good, or really bad, depending on how you look at it. Probably closer to bad. Maybe let's not hire Doug Peterson, but hey, it can't get much worse in Chicago. Can it? And this brings me to the number 1 team on my list, and of course it is, as always, the Cleveland Browns. At this time last year, not just Cleveland, but the entire NFL world was going crazy because the Browns were in the playoffs. And not only that, they won a game. Convincingly, I might add, against a good Steelers team. This season, at this time, the Browns and their fans are in a position all too familiar. At home on the couch. And it's saddening because over the past 3 years, I would say they've done everything right. Okay, well, I mean, maybe not everything. Freddie Kitchens was the thing. I don't know how that happened, but it did. But they've done a lot of good things right. I mean, Kevin Stefanski was a great hire at head coach, honestly. Baker Mayfield has plenty of weapons and great protection. And they spent the offseason making their defense as talented as any other in the league. I mean, you bring in John Johnson, Troy Hill, Malik Jackson, Anthony Walker. These are all solid players that make this defense as good as any other in the league. But there's one glaring issue that simply cannot be ignored. And it's Baker Mayfield. He isn't the answer. He's not the guy. Cleveland needs to stop trying so hard to convince themselves that he is the guy and start calling plays despite Mayfield instead. It makes me question Kevin Stefanski a little bit. I mean, anyone who trusts the ball in the hands of Baker Mayfield more than they do in the hands of Nick Chubb or Kareem Hunt, you're going to leave me with more questions than I have answers. If you can't trust your quarterback, yet you choose to trust him anyhow, you should probably reconsider your game plan and get a new quarterback. Because with the roster that the Browns have now, another season below 500 is just not going to cut it. Especially moving forward when there's going to be quarterbacks available that are better than Baker Mayfield. I mean, call me crazy, I'd take Jimmy Garoppolo over Baker Mayfield. I'd take Kirk Cousins over Baker Mayfield. I'd try and go trade for Deshaun Watson instead of Baker Mayfield. Baker Mayfield isn't the answer anymore. It's time for a change in Cleveland at quarterback because every other piece is there. And this team can make a run into the playoffs if they get consistent quarterback play. But here we are, trusting Baker Mayfield, and as usual, the Browns are a disappointment. And that is my list for the top 5 most disappointing teams from the 2021 NFL season. Did you agree with me? Did you disagree? Let me know in the comments down below. And if you like Ranked, you might like some of our other content on Evolution 1079's podcast network. You can find it all at evolution1079.com. But for now, as always, I've been your host, Jamie Sheeho. This has been Ranked on the Evolution 1079 podcast network, and I will see you again next time. Thanks for tuning in, and stay safe, everyone.